Hi, I'm Edward Funk. This is podcast number 28. Now, in my recent podcast and several podcasts going forward are about my Hollywood phase. And you might question, why would a kid who grew up in the cornfields of Indiana have had a Hollywood phase? That's because I was the biographer of actress Loretta Young, and it was a fascinating experience. A little blatant promotion. This book is called Loretta and Me, and it's really where I'm getting my information for recent podcasts and podcasts going forward. But I'm only skimming through the book. If you really want more depth, go on Amazon, and it's available. Buy it. Now, when I closed my last podcast, I said that I discussed Loretta's friendship with actress Irene Dunne. In this podcast I'm doing now. Irene had a spectacular career in film that covered many genres, but my favorite Irene Dunne movies were the romantic comedies she did with Cary Grant. The Author Truth is one of them. My Favorite Wife is another one. Those are both really classics. Now, from my perspective, she was not a great beauty like Loretta, but she conveyed a sense of fun on the screen. And I think audiences enjoyed that. Now, one day I answered the phone at Loretta's house, and it was Irene calling. Identifying herself as Mrs. Griffith. She sounded peeved that she was talking with a stranger. This was only a few months before she died, and Loretta was visiting her weekly. I gave Loretta the message that Irene had called, and Loretta related a conversation she'd had with Irene a few weeks earlier. Loretta said, I tried to get over to see Irene weekly and just call her daily, but there was a period for a few weeks when I was out of town. So when I did call her, I said, Irene, I love you. She said, no, you don't. You haven't called me in 2 weeks. Oh, the tone of her voice, says Loretta. She sounded like an angry, hurt child. I felt so guilty, and I was determined I'd make up for it. But strangely enough, for Irene to say that to me was very touching. It was the nearest she ever came to telling me that I meant something to her. Throughout her life, Irene had never shown her feelings, and now that wall had come down. In the last week of Irene's life, I went with Loretta to Irene's home as we were en route to someplace else. By that time, I understood that Irene was dying, and it was eerie to be in her home. It was a formal house. The door was answered by an elderly butler in a white jacket. As Loretta climbed the stairs, the butler showed me into the living room, and then he disappeared. I knew that Gladys, Loretta's mother, had decorated this house, and it had much the same feel as Loretta's house, except it was tired. It seemed threadbare. It had a feel of no one having been in these rooms for some time. The house seemed to know that its mistress was dying. Now, if I haven't said it before, I'll say it now. Loretta was on the Hollywood A party list, but it was a list made up of stars past the age of 65, and that was great for me because these were the people that I was most interested in meeting. I'd already became one of Loretta's frequent escorts. She told me that she was confident that I would conduct myself, especially since I didn't drink, and say something that either of us might regret. So one such occasion was a christening of triplets. The grandmother, Lorenza Cartwright, her husband had been the manager of the Beverly Hills Hotel. Mrs. Cartwright was hosting. The baby's father was the grandson of George Hallis, the owner and titan of the Chicago Bears. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I remember waiting for Loretta to come down the stairs of her home. She descended as if she was in a movie, posture perfect, and wearing a white dress, a matching white coat, and a white hat. When we arrived at the party, most of the women were wearing white, and Loretta and I sat down with Jane Wyman, who was starring in TV soap opera, evening soap opera called Falcon Crest. A little PS about Jane. She was also an Academy Award-winning actress for a movie called Johnny Belinda, and plus that, she had been Ronald Reagan's first wife. So, but let's get back to the party. Jane was telling Loretta about the difficulty she was having with the director and some of the other actors. Loretta shook her head and said, "It's just ridiculous. Don't they realize that they're going to have to do it your way in the end?" Jane agreed. And that conversation was enlightening to me regarding the power that these actresses were used to wielding. So now actress dancer Ann Miller was also there. She seemed nervous as out of her element. Now Ann Miller was really maybe, if not the best tap dancer, female tap dancer in the movies, maybe the second best after Eleanor Powell. She was in a number of great MGM movies in the 1950s. Now, another Sunday afternoon, there was an occasion for the rededication of the hospital of the Motion Picture Retirement Home in Woodland Hills. Loretta, Ronald Reagan, and Robert Young had all been part of the dedication of the hospital in 1948, and the three of them were present again. The day got off to a bumpy start. Loretta and I were to accompany Josie Wayne, her oldest son Michael, and his wife Gretchen. Now I have to interject, if you missed last week's podcast, Josie Wayne was John Wayne's first wife. I arrived at Loretta's house just as the Waynes were arriving in a limousine. Now, a little PS about a limousine. This is where Loretta was a bit of a snob. She said it always had to be a black limousine. She said, you know, hairdressers rent white limousines. Now, back to my story. I had met Michael Wayne before, as I interviewed him at his office. Loretta was his godmother. Now, having the key to the kitchen, I announced that I'd let myself in and tell Loretta that we'd all arrived. The house was still quiet, and Loretta didn't answer when I shouted up the stairs. So I opened the door and let Michael in, and I assured him that I knew the code to turn off the alarm so that we could go upstairs and check on Loretta. I must have pushed the wrong buttons. Of course I must have, because the alarm started blasting, and Michael gave me a disgusted look. I don't think I ever recovered in his esteem. The alarm had awakened Loretta, and she prevented further repercussions by calling the security company. And it was the fastest I ever knew Loretta to dress, and we were soon on our way to Woodland Hills. Okay. Now, all the residents were people who had been in the movie industry. One of the residents was May Clark. Now, if you're an old movie fan, uh, there was a movie called Public Enemy, and Jimmy Cagney uh, picks up a grapefruit and smashes it and rubs it in May Clark's face. Now, May had told Loretta that the original script called for Cagney to, you know, rub eggs in her face, and he refused to do that. So it was May who came up with the idea of the grapefruit. Either way, Loretta felt that the scene of macho aggressiveness had really ruined May's career. Loretta employed May whenever she could. In fact, I just saw a Loretta movie a couple of weeks ago called Because of You, and May had a minor role as a nurse. Loretta also used May in several episodes of Loretta's TV show. Now, there were many celebrities wandering around the grounds that day, such as Roddy McDowell, Robert Wagner, and his wife Jill St. John. Now, Roddy McDowell, you have to go way back to, he was the little boy in the first of the Lassie movies called Lassie Come Home. And then he had a career after that, but he really wasn't a leading man. Now, Robert Wagner, he had a significant movie career for 20th Century Fox, but I think maybe more people even remember him as Natalie Wood's husband, who was on that boat where she somehow fell off, and big controversy. Was it really an accident, or did Robert Wagner, was he responsible for Natalie Wood's death? So I don't think we'll ever really know the answer to that. Now, Jill St. John was a very attractive, not really so much a leading lady, or if she was, not in a lot of movies, but she certainly was a beauty. And that day she was wearing a tomato red suit, and it just looked great with her red hair. Now, a woman who noticed my focus kind of sidled up to me and said, "Poor Jill, she used to be so beautiful." And I just thought, meow. So a little something about Robert Wagner, probably totally in my imagination. But he seemed to look at me in the way a gay man looks at another gay man. The other thing I'd say about him, it was obvious that his brown hair was dyed, and not a very good dye job at that. I mean, kind of looked like shoe polish. Now, a band played "Hail to the Chief" when the Reagans, and it's when the Reagans arrived. That surprised me since he was no longer president, but it did catch everyone's attention. And the former president and Mrs. Reagan kind of swept through the crowd and onto a platform. Ronald Reagan said some quick, pithy words, and then the Reagans were swept back into their waiting car. Now, Robert Young seemed really out of it, and I wondered if he had been drinking, as I had read about his battles with alcohol. But more recently, I read that he had been painfully shy his whole life, and that could explain why it struck me that he would rather be any place other than where he was that day. Loretta, myself, and the Waynes soon left, and Michael hosted us to a late lunch at the Hillcrest Country Club. A lot of the conversation was about John Ford, who directed a number of John Wayne's best films. But Michael continuously made the point that Ford was really a bastard. And Loretta had made a film with Ford and absolutely concurred. Now, a fan approached the table as we were having lunch, asking Loretta for an autograph. Her reply was, "Well, not now, I'm with friends." Of course, what she basically was saying, bug off, because when would they ever get another chance? Now, Michael had pointed out to me when I'd interviewed him a few weeks earlier um, that Loretta and his dad, John Wayne, handled the autograph situation quite differently. John Wayne always took the time to sign an autograph because he felt he owed it to the people who bought the movie tickets and had made him a star. Now, the Waynes dropped us off at Loretta's house, and after entering through the kitchen, Loretta pressed the flashing message button on her phone. Once she realized who it was Nancy Reagan, she rolled her eyes and held the receiver out so that I could hear her. Having just seen the Reagans regaled like royalty a few hours earlier, I got a kick that Loretta had been dodging Mrs. Reagan's calls. The reason she was calling is that she was going to give a dinner party for actress Claudette Colbert, and she was inviting Loretta. Now, Loretta changed her clothes, and when she returned, I said, with all the celebrities present today, the photographers seem most interested in you. She smiled and said, I can tell you one reason. When I finally got up this morning and realized it was going to be a hot day, I knew that most of the women would be wearing white because white is cooler. So I decided to wear black, and not just a black dress, but a huge black hat as well. So I couldn't help but stand out. So it had been a long time since Loretta's movie star days, but she still had the movie star instincts. Now, the next big party I escorted Loretta included the very rich and lots of famous people. So tune in. I think you'll find it interesting. Thank you.